Yeah. This Philly celeb, man. You tuned in to Late Night Date Night. It's season two. Yeah. This season, we're going to bring you some thought provoking topics. We're going to bring you deep conversations with intelligent women from all across the map, all types of different scenarios, opinions, all types of things. So tune in, listen, get your little notepad, write down some shit because you might be going through the same shit that we talking about. Headed to the top, but I lost a few homies. Some to a bullet and some to being phony. Niggas used to hate, now them same niggas Joe me. Shorty said she love me, baby girl, you don't know me. Stuck to the plan, now I'm getting bands. Band at the band at the band. Stuck to the plan, now I'm getting bands. Bands at the band at the band. Stuck to the plan, now I'm getting bands. Band at the band at the band. Stuck to the plan, now I'm getting bands. Band at the band at the band. So, in the group, you were telling me that psychedelics saved your relationship.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't know. Like, I think they've saved my. Well, I don't know if I would say saved my life. I would, because that makes it sound like I was at some point suicidal. But they definitely changed my life, and definitely. I definitely went through some dark periods of like not really knowing who I was and not really feeling like I was following the path that I wanted for myself in my life. And so I feel like in a lot of ways, psychedelics have helped me kind of be more clear about what I want and how I define happiness. But yeah, I mean, so my husband and I both had pretty traumatic childhoods, and coming into our relationship with each other, we had both kind of gotten out of some pretty bad relationships as well, and so we really just both wanted to be better people for each other. And we had kids, so I have three kids, and after having our three kids, we got to this point that it was like, wow, life is just not as enjoyable as we felt like it should be. And I think one of the interesting things from growing up in such a hard environment when I was a kid is that I didn't know how to be a family, and being around my kids made me uncomfortable because I didn't know how to interact with them, and I think my husband kind of felt the same way. And so one of the interesting things I think that psychedelics do for you is they give you this sense of you get to make your own rules, and you get to decide what happiness means to you, and you don't have to try to be anything or anybody for anyone as long as you're being a good person and, following your purpose and being authentic. So I think all of those things kind of helped us rediscover each other and kind of discover ourselves. Because I think one of the big things in a relationship is that, you have to bring your authentic self into the relationship, and then, the biggest goal is to help the other person understand who you are and how to make you happy, and then do the same for them. And that's really tough if you're struggling with questions about who you are and, what it is going to take to make you happy. So I think that, by using psychedelics and kind of answering some of those questions for myself, and same for him, it enabled us to be better people and to also articulate to each other, this is what I want, this is what I need, this is what's important to me.
Okay, do you mind taking us back to just briefly, if you want to, talk about your childhood? I don't know if that's something that you would like to talk about, but if you don't mind.
Sure, yeah. So I'm actually the only child of my parents. So growing up, it was me, and then my dad had a son from a previous marriage, and my mom had a daughter from a previous marriage. And they were both 10 years older than me. So I was the baby by a lot. And I didn't really have any brothers or sisters that were my age. And my brother and sister both kind of resented me a little bit, I think, both because they constantly were asked to babysit me, and I think they were abused significantly more than I was. So I was more neglected than I was abused, and I think because they had endured more kind of physical and emotional abuse than I had, and it was always kind of clear in the house that I was my parents' like do-over baby. So I was like, and my dad had even alluded a couple times when I was a kid to like I was his chance to get it right. And so as much as he could, he definitely wasn't a great parent, but I think he tried a lot harder with me. And, you know, I think they were also older, right? So they were 10 years older when they had me, and then when they had my brother and sister. And so they were more mature. And, you know, I just think that things are a lot different. But, you know, my parents fought, like, constantly. And, you know, I can remember a lot of nights when I was a kid, you know, laying in bed and not being able to sleep because they were just yelling at each other. And, you know, my dad was very physically and verbally and emotionally abusive, and my mom, it's really interesting. Here's the other thing that psychedelics have brought me is a lot of perspective. So up until a handful of years ago, I would have said, you know, my mom was kind of just a victim in the situation. And, you know, I think a combination of having more maturity, having my own kids, and also kind of re-examining how I looked at things. My mom did a lot of things to kind of emotionally like emasculate my dad and like emotionally I'm not sure what the best way to put it. I don't want to say antagonize, because I mean nobody should ever put their hands on somebody else, right? But
yes.
Like my mom would encourage myself and my siblings to like make fun of my dad, and so like she would pick on him. And it's strange because you know, like because he was more physically abusive and more verbally abusive, I always looked at it as just like she was a victim in a really shitty situation. But the more I look at it, the more I'm like, you know, she was a little bit abusive to him in her own ways, and that, you know, she, so one of the things that really sticks out to me is like she would encourage us to make chicken noises anytime he wore shorts, because she always used to tell him that like he had chicken legs. And so, I mean, it seems like a stupid small thing, but I can only imagine, you know, trying to empathize with him, what it's like to live in a house full of people that disrespect you and that, you know, kind of like pick on you. And yeah, so I think, you know, I just think it was a really toxic relationship between both of them. And so they both worked full time, and I was left home alone quite a bit. So once my brother and sister left the house, my sister left when I was like 6, my brother left when I was 7. So from like 7 years old on, I would be home alone, you know, after school to pretty late at night, 6 or 7 at night, and then all summer. And I was kind of just left to fend for myself. And, you know, so I ended up becoming pretty overweight because I was feeding myself. So I wasn't eating fruits and vegetables and stuff like that. It was like Pop-Tarts and cereal and whatever was easy for a 7, 8, 9-year-old to cook. And so my parents used to ridicule me all the time about being fat. You know, and thinking back on it, I'm like, well, you're the one that was feeding me. Like, you were the one buying me food and, you know, putting the groceries in the house. So maybe you shouldn't have bought me junk food. You know, like instead of, you know, ridiculing a 10-year-old for being fat, maybe don't buy Hostess cupcakes, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like, again, like having my own kids, I'm like, you know, I look at a lot of the stuff that I went through, and they're ages now that I can remember being, and I'm like, I can't believe my parents made me feel bad for some of this stuff. Yeah, so I mean, when I grew up, like I was well over 300 pounds by the time I had left high school, and I ended up losing 200 pounds. So like I'm like, I don't know, probably 160 right now. And
that's good.
You know, yeah, I mean, it's definitely. But it's one of those things that it took a long time to understand why I felt the way that I did and why I processed life the way that I did. But yeah, so just like, and the unfortunate thing is that both of my parents are kind of bullies. And so, you know, like they would bully each other, they would bully us, they were just really nasty people. Like they never had a good thing to say about anybody. I don't remember them having friends. Like it's crazy to think about. Like, yeah, like I've always, my whole life, I've had a hard time, you know, I have a really, really cool, awesome group of friends now, but up until like my mid to late 20s, I had a really, really hard time making friends, and I would usually end up being friends with assholes. Like, all of my friends were jerks, and at some point in my mid-20s, I realized it's because I was a jerk. And, it's like, I realized that, like, the whole way I learned how to relate to the world was kind of through my parents, and because they didn't have a lot of friends, and I had trouble making friends as a kid, like, I didn't have a lot of outside influences other than them to teach me how to be a better person, or, like, how to talk to people in a non-rude and condescending way. So I definitely, by the time I became an adult, was like 18, 19, I was a pretty terrible person. And like, I look back at the way I lived my life and some of the things I did, and it's really, like, I think cringeworthy is an understatement.
Would you mind saying, like, one or two things that you did, or no?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I used to, I grew up on the internet, right? So I got the internet when I was like 12 or 13, I think. And so I used to love to bully people on the internet. And, I'm fairly well-spoken, and I'm pretty quick-witted, so I can be pretty nasty. And so, I was just like, that's what I did. I would just bully people on the internet, and, like in chat rooms, or, like on, I used to, when I started riding a motorcycle, I was a member of this, like, motorcycle forum, and, it was like me and, like, 4 or 5 other girls and, like, a couple hundred dudes on this forum, and I think part of my way of dealing with the fact that they weren't necessarily always the nicest because I was female was, like, I would just gang up with some of them and pick on people there, and I ended up becoming best friends with this girl when I was, I don't know, probably 18 or 19, and we moved in together, and we were always together, and it got even worse because she was a bully too. So, like, when we would go out, like, all we would do is sit around and just talk shit about everybody around us, and it was just, it was so bad, and, like, I also, I can be really manipulative, so, and I've learned how to use that for somewhat good reason, to help people make better decisions, and now, like, because I think anybody that's highly empathetic can be manipulative, because when you can empathize with other people, you understand how to say things to them in a way that, like, makes the most impact, and how to, put ideas in their head that they maybe didn't consider before, and so you can either use that for good or evil, and I definitely used to use it for evil. I was a terrible girlfriend. Like, I cheated on almost every guy I ever dated, and just, like, I think, everything that I did, that I look back and I'm like, oh God, it's all kind of like these symptoms of, insecurity and just, like, not, I don't know. And the other thing is, I always used to equate, like, caring about people with weakness. And so, like, I never really wanted to care too much about anybody because I always interpreted that as being weak. And, if you care too much about somebody, you give them the power to hurt you. And I definitely don't look at life like that anymore. But
where did you get that from, though? Not to cut you off. Where did you get that feeling that caring about somebody is weak? I once felt like that before in the past, but, like, where did that develop in you? Like, that made you feel like that?
I think that, I think if I go way, way back, the one person that I really cared about when I was young, like a child, was my older sister. So, like, my older brother was always pretty mean to me, but my sister was kind of like a second mom. So, my parents were always gone, and so she babysat me most of the time, and I looked up to her a lot, and, like, I wanted to be just like her, and she, like, there's a huge backstory here, but she ended up leaving when I was, like, 6 or 7. Like, she was a very kind of rebellious teenager, and she moved out, and she more or less just kind of disappeared for a couple years, and, like, went from basically being my second mom to, like, never coming around, and, like, never really having a whole lot to do with us. And so, and then, like, no, I understand better now why. There's a whole bunch of stuff that happened between her and my parents, and but I think, from a pretty young age, I was like, the only person I really cared about like just kind of deserted me. And then, you know, like the first couple boyfriends that I had, because I didn't have great models for relationships growing up, I had like some really dysfunctional relationships, and it was like, and I feel like anytime I opened myself up, I got hurt. So eventually it was just like, all right, if I just put on the, and like, because I was really fat when I was a kid, and I had really thick glasses, and I was really smart. And so it was like the trifecta of getting picked on. And so I think I learned that if I made fun of myself before other people did, then, you know, I could be self-deprecating, and it would take the power away. And if I made fun of other people first, or had really good comebacks when people made fun of me, then that would, you know, would make me feel better. So I just think I built a pretty thick shell around me, and was like, I'm not going to let anybody in. I'm not going to care, because, like, it doesn't get me anywhere. It just ends up getting me hurt.
Okay. And, like, how long in life, when did you move past that? Like, about how old were you when you moved past that and figured that you'll let somebody in?
I think it was kind of a process. So I was, let's see here, when I was about 24, I was 24. So I grew up mostly in New Hampshire, and I was living in New Hampshire, and I was 24, and I was living with the friend I was talking about that was also super toxic, and I just kind of like, this is going to sound like the dumbest thing, but I'm not even kidding when I say this. So I was driving home from my sister's house, which is a couple of miles from my house, and somehow, I don't listen to country ever, but somehow on the radio there's this Tim McGraw song called, like, Live Like You Were Dying, and I think some of the lyrics in it go he says something like, I was finally the husband that most of the time I wasn't, and I became a friend would like to have. And something about those lyrics just, like, cut me to the core, because I realized, like, I'm not the kind of girlfriend that I would want. I'm not the kind of friend that I would want. I'm like nothing about me as a person is something that I would want in my life. And I have this, like, somewhat toxic friendship with this other person. Like, my best friend and I, we kind of had this, like, mutually abusive, non-sexual relationship, you know, like, we would be assholes to each other, we'd be assholes to other people, but we lived together, and, like, we were really the only people that would put up with each other, so we were kind of stuck together, and just, like, everything, it was like all at once, it just hit me, like, I am a really shitty person. And I think that happened when I was about, like, 23 or 24, so it was 23, and then I decided that I needed to just get out of New Hampshire, that, like, I was living around a bunch of people that never aspired to be more than they were, so I was sitting, a couple of days later, I'm sitting in this bar, and it's, like, Sunday, and I was drinking a lot at the time, too, so I used to go out, like, 4 or 5 nights a week. And, I'm sitting in a bar with my friends, and it's, like, the same people that I've been drinking with for 2 or 3 years. We're telling the same stories. We're at the same bar, and, like, there's this term in New England of, like, a townie, and it's basically, like, a townie is, like, someone that grows up, lives, gets married, and dies in the same town. Like, that's all you ever aspire to do, is just, like, live where you grew up. And, at that point I was like, oh shit, like, I gotta get out of here. I can't live here anymore, because I'm becoming a townie, and I'm gonna end up marrying some idiot I went to high school with and have a couple ugly kids. I'm just gonna die in New Hampshire. And so I literally, like, applied to a whole bunch of jobs in California, with my company that I worked for, got one, and moved all in the matter of, like, 2 weeks. And I had never even been to California, didn't really know much about California, so it was just like, the company was going to pay for me to move, and it was like, all right, this is what I'm doing. Like, I'm going to get the hell out of here. And so I think like that all happened over the course of a couple months. And I made this decision of like, when I get to California, nobody knows me. I don't have any history here. I'm away from this friend. I don't have a boyfriend. I am going to be a better person. And I ended up meeting my husband just a couple months after I moved to California. And I fell so in love with him so fast that I think that also helped a lot too, because I was like, all I wanted to do from really early on in our relationship was be a better person for him. And as silly as it sounds, like he was the first guy I ever wanted to be less crazy for. Like, his house was between my work and my house. That was like off a side street. And there was this one, like, we used to text all day, every day. So like from the day we went on our first date till now, and we're actually like a couple days away from our 10th anniversary.
Oh, congratulations.
And we would, thanks, yeah, we would text like all day, every day. And there was one day that like I just didn't hear from him. It was probably like 2 or 3 months into our relationship. And not even, actually, I think it was like maybe 6 weeks into our relationship. I just didn't hear from him. And it was like, it drove me nuts all day. And I was like trying not to text him too much, because I was like, Doug, don't be thirsty, don't be crazy. Like, maybe he's busy. But then, this little voice in the back of my head is like, maybe there's a chick at his house. Maybe he's with his ex-girlfriend. Maybe, and so I got in my car, and I'm like, all right, I'm driving home. I'm going to drive by his house. Like, I'm going to drive down a street that if I turn 2 streets over, I could drive by his house. And I took a deep breath, and I was like, don't do this. Like, don't be crazy. Don't be jealous. Don't be, like, for once in your life, like, take a deep breath. And I didn't drive by his house. And when I got to my house, I was like, oh, shit, I am so in love with this dude that I am actively trying not to be crazy. Like, it's like how I knew I was sprung. I was like, oh, no. But yeah, like, and same with him, like, we both, he also was not the best person when he was younger, and so I think from the moment we met each other, we both were just like, I'm going to be a better person for you. Like, I just want to be better for you. And it's been this continual, like, 10-year process of us just holding each other accountable and talking and, trying to recalibrate, because we both have just, like, very shitty families and very shitty role models and hung out with shitty friends. And so there was like, it's been kind of 10 years of trying to build a moral compass of like, this is the kind of person I want to be.
So how long after dating did y'all get married?
So we got married a little over a year into dating. And actually it's funny, when we first started seeing each other, it was supposed to be a booty call. So it was like, we met on, and not even kidding, we met on OkCupid, and on paper, if you had asked me to make a list of like all of the things I didn't want in someone that I was going to date, he would have hit like 90% of those things. And I think vice versa. Like, I'm a very strong personality. I'm a really ambitious person, and he had always kind of dated like more like submissive females, and like just like, and like, we're intellectually, I would guess that our IQs are probably within a couple points of each other. Like, we're just very equally matched, and neither of us had really ever dated someone else that was like that. I think we both, prior to meeting each other, had preferred to be in relationships with people that were maybe a little bit lower than us. I mean, it's a shitty thing to say, but it's true. And so, like, when we first met, it was like, all right, I think you're cute, you think I'm cute, we're not really that compatible, so this could just be a booty call. But then our first date, we went out to lunch together and went back to my house, and we ended up standing on my back porch for like 4.5 hours just talking. And like talking about our childhoods and our parents and our families, and that is not something that either of us had ever done before. Like, I didn't open up very easily to people, and he definitely didn't. And it was just like, we had such similar childhood, like very similar dads, very similar moms, like kind of very similar family dynamics, and it was just like, oh crap. but still we were like, yeah, but like other than that, we're really not compatible. So I think for like a handful of weeks, we just kind of hooked up, and then probably a little over a month in, I texted him and I was like, we should probably stop doing what we're doing, because I'm definitely catching feelings, and like, I don't want to go crazy on you, and I know you're not looking for anything serious, and so like, we should just like agree to part ways amicably. And he was like, no, I'm actually pretty into you too, so we should just date. So that's kind of how that happened. And we actually, like, we knew we were going to get married, and the only reason we waited as long as we did is his sister was engaged and was like doing the whole long drawn out process of like engagement. It was like a wedding a year later and everything, and we didn't want to like jump in front of her and get married, so we waited until after her wedding, which was like, I think, so we started dating in like August or September, and then her wedding was like the next May, and then we got married like that September, I think. So it was almost exactly a year into like officially dating.
Okay. So how did y'all get introduced into psychedelics?
So it's kind of a, what's funny is like I'm trying to think. So when I was like 22, I had tried mushrooms with my friend, and it didn't go well. So we did all the wrong things. Like we had gone to a water park that day, and so we were both sunburned and exhausted. And then we came home, and in New Hampshire, almost nobody has air conditioning, or at least at this point, nobody did. And so it was like, I'm not even kidding when I say it was probably 90 to 95 degrees in my house. It was so hot in my house. And like, she had, like, for as bad as my childhood was, hers was 1,000 times worse, and she had done even less work than I had on herself. And so, like, we were both, like, just really fucked up people, and they, like, split these mushrooms, and, like, and then afterwards, of course, a couple years later, I read, like, heat exacerbates the effect of mushrooms, and so the thing is, like, for the first part of that trip, I was actually having a fairly good trip. Like, I remember going in the bathroom and looking in the mirror, and this is when I was probably like maybe 40 pounds heavier than I am now, so I had lost a lot of weight, but I still, like, there's this whole body dysmorphia thing where when you're really, really fat and then you lose a lot of weight, you still look fat when you look in the mirror. Like, it's a strange phenomenon. But, like, I still didn't feel skinny, and I still didn't feel attractive. And I went in the bathroom and looked in the mirror, and I was like, oh my God, I am so pretty. And so I called her, and then I was like, hey, get in here. And she comes in the bathroom. I'm like, look at the mirror. I was like, we are so pretty. Like, can you believe how pretty we are? And, and so it was a fairly good trip from the beginning. And then she started to kind of spiral. And so I think she was having, like, I don't know, like suicidal thoughts or something like that. And so because she thought I was, and, like, it just turned into a really bad trip for the last couple hours. And then I've since learned to never do psychedelics when I'm really tired, because when you're really tired towards the end of your trip, you can get into these loops where your brain just kind of spins. And I always liken it to, like, if you've ever blown up a balloon and then let it go, and it's just like all over the place. Like, your brain kind of does that if you're really tired and then you do psychedelics. And it's just not, for me at least. So I did that, and then I was like, the next day, I was like, I am never doing that again. Like, ever doing that again. It was a terrible idea. It was a horrible time. The couple hours at the beginning that were good were not worth what happened afterwards. And so I just didn't touch them. And we actually, so fast forward, 2015, my husband and I had 3 kids in 4 years. We had both been working crazy, like, really hard in our careers. We hadn't taken a vacation, and I don't even know how long. And we were at, like, complete burnout mode. and we were kind of talking about, like, should we stay together? Should we split up? Like, we never fought, but we were just both so unhappy that we were like, something's got to give. And if we're going to get divorced, we should get divorced, like, now, before our kids are old enough to even remember us being together, because we're unhappy. And, you know, like, we don't want our kids to grow up in an unhappy house, because we had grown up in an unhappy house. So even though we weren't fighting, we were like, should we stay together? And I think it turns out that, like, we just hadn't taken enough time for ourselves, because once you have kids, it's really easy to lose yourself into being a parent and, like, completely forget who you were before you had kids, or that you had an identity that wasn't mom and dad. And so we had, so it's kind of a detailed story, but so we were laying in bed one night, and there was this documentary about EDC, the music festival, on Netflix, and we watched it. And I was like, oh my God, we need to go there. like, we need to find a babysitter for the kids. We need to take a weekend for ourselves, and we need to go to a music festival. And neither of us had ever been to a music festival. We didn't really listen to that much electronic music, but the documentary just made it seem like this is a place you can go and be as weird as you want to be, and everybody will love and accept you for exactly who you are, or whoever you want to pretend to be. And so we did. We just went, and, like, I looked online, and it was like 2 weeks later, and so we bought tickets on Craigslist and literally just, like, last minute went to this music festival. And it was insane. It was, like, life-changing, because it truly was. And, you know, like, the unfortunate thing is that music festivals have become so mainstream now that they're kind of losing some of this, but it truly was this place where people just came with open minds and open hearts, and they wanted to get to know you. And, like, you know, at this point, like, neither of us had ever done MDMA. We had never done, you know, like, I had only done the mushrooms once. He'd never done psychedelics. We just drank. We smoked a ton of weed. And the thing that I think makes music festivals really special is that the drugs that most people are on are drugs that, like, make you more in touch with people. Like, when you drink, you just become really selfish, and you know, like, because your judgment's impacted and, like, your perception's impacted, it kind of, like, it disconnects you from the situation you're in. Whereas when you're doing things like MDMA, which, like, you know, softens your amygdala and increases your serotonin and dopamine and norepinephrine, like, you're becoming more in touch with everybody around you, and you want to connect with the people around you. And so, like, being in a place that was that tolerant and loving and accepting was just amazing. And so for, like, a year, we go to music festivals, and all we do is, like, we smoke weed, and, like, we watch all these people around us on drugs, right? And at the same time, I'm, like, starting to read biographies of people, you know, like Steve Jobs, and, like, I think he ended up reading the biography of Albert Hoffman, who was the scientist that actually, like, he didn't discover LSD, but he was the first person to really, like, synthesize it. And, like, started to listen to a ton of podcasts, and one of the podcasts I was listening to was talking about psychedelics. And so I think the first thing we tried was MDMA, because we both had, like, all this trauma in our past, and, like, really needed to connect as a couple, and we felt like that was going to be something that was going to make it a lot easier. And, you know, we didn't ever, like, still, I can count, like, 2 or 3 times, I think, that we've ever done, like, MDMA and actually stayed at a music festival. Like, for the most part, anytime we've ever done it, and we actually don't really do it anymore, but anytime we've ever done it, we've ended up just going away from the music and sitting down and just talking and having these, like, very deep heart-to-hearts. And a lot of the time that we've done MDMA, we've done it at home together, and it's always been in a kind of very intentional way of, like, let's sit down and work through some shit, you know, more than, like, let's roll our faces off and party. So it started there, and then it was like, okay, like, we should try some psychedelics. But because of my bad experience with mushrooms, I didn't want to do those. And at the time, because I'd never done psychedelics, I thought acid was the most ridiculous thing that anybody could do. Like, I had grown up, and I think this is really important for people to understand, is that, like, if you were born in the 80s to, like, mid-90s, You grew up in the DARE generation. You grew up in the war on drugs. You grew up in this very intentional kind of brainwashing against drugs, and it very much against psychedelics. And so, like, I was one of the people that, like, basically a cop came into my classroom when I was in, like, second grade on, and a couple times a year they would bring this fucking McGruff the crime dog.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
This dude in a dog costume, and he would be your buddy, where this cop was standing next to him and was like, if you smoke the marijuana, you will end up sucking dick for crack, and you will die in a gutter. That is the exact progression. Like, this is a progression of drug use, and you will die if you smoke the pot. And, like, that was the generation I grew up in, so I was terrified of drugs. You know, and I really, like, I smoked a little bit of weed when I was a teenager with my sister, but, like, I never really smoked weed that much until I was older, and, like, I was just terrified of drugs. So I believed that acid was the drug that would make you go crazy, jump out a window, and die, right? And, like, most people have heard that. And a lot of that stuff comes from the government, and it comes from the experiments that the CIA was doing, you know, in the late 40s through the 70s, you know, both under MK Ultra and, you know, the programs before that. And did people jump out windows and die? Maybe. But I don't know if you've gotten a chance to watch the documentary Wormwood.
Wormwood?
Yeah, so there's this documentary on Netflix called Wormwood, and it's about that story and about why people believe that acid will make you jump out of a window and die. And it turns out that what happened is, I think this is in the early 50s, the CIA was experimenting with LSD, and they would dose people unknowingly, and they would dose them, like, with 100 hits. So we're not talking about, like, a couple. We're talking about massive doses of LSD, and they thought it would be, like, either a truth serum or a mind control drug. And what ended up happening is they gave it to this scientist that worked at Fort Detrick, which is where they were doing a lot of experiments with, like, chemical weapons. And he ended up having this, like, crisis of conscience where he was like, holy shit, we are doing with chemical weapons is wrong, and we're using chemical weapons in Korea, and we're lying about it. And he just had this, like, complete existential crisis. And so what ended up happening is they actually ended up throwing him out a window in New York, and then basically making it look like he committed suicide. And so, like, that's kind of where that comes from. And it took this poor family, it took them, like, 15 years to have all of the truth about what actually happened to come out. So, like, in the 70s, they got some of it out, but, like, it took them years and years and years to get the government to admit that, like, he didn't go on an acid trip and jump out a window. Like, they murdered him because doing acid made him have a crisis of conscience about all of the chemical weapons he had been working on at Fort Detrick. So I guess I didn't mean for the impromptu kind of history lesson on that, but that's the kind of shit that I thought about acid, right? So when we went to do psychedelics for the first time, we actually did mescaline. And mescaline is, like, there's a lot of different ways you can get it. I guess you can get it as, like, powder and capsules, but the closest to legal way to do mescaline is it's actually derived from San Pedro cactus. And San Pedro cactus is totally legal to buy. Like, you can buy it on the internet. Like, people have it just growing in their yards. And so we bought San Pedro cactus. And full disclosure, my understanding is that the process of actually putting it in your blender and then boiling it down on the stove and turning it into mescaline is probably illegal in most states. But, yeah, so you basically you get this cactus on the internet, you stick it in a blender, turn it into liquid, boil it down as much as you can on the stove because that shit tastes horrible. So you kind of want it to be the smallest quantity possible, and then you drink it. And much like, you know, most plant medicines, you end up throwing a lot of it up. Like, you purge because it upsets your stomach. And then after you purge, you have a pretty glorious trip. So we got this hotel in San Francisco, and this hotel was insane. We didn't even mean to book this hotel. It was just, like, the cheapest one we could find. It wasn't, you know, 1 star. And this hotel, I don't recall the name. I think it's called, like, the International or something like that. The entire hotel is pineapples and mirrors. And it was like, we could not have picked a more trippy place to do our first psychedelic trip. because like literally the whole bathroom is mirrors. The walls are mirrors, the ceiling's a mirror, there's a huge mirror on the wall, and like anything that's not a mirror is covered in pineapples. And like mescaline is this very like I don't know how to describe it. It's like halfway between mushrooms and ayahuasca. Like it's like a very immersive trip, and so we put on the 50 greatest classical music songs of all time. So like these amazing like orchestral classical music pure like pieces, and you know like when the Nutcracker Suite came on, like Christmas exploded in my room and in the hotel room, and then like when the William Tell Overture came on, like there were all these horses stampeding across the room. It was just really cool. It was a great experience. And so after that, we were like, that was insane. And then a couple weeks later, we were at a music festival and we met these other people. And so I think the one thing is that like when you want to experiment with drugs, you're like, how do I do it safely, right? Because I have 3 kids. I'm not trying to end up dead or like on the cover of a newspaper. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, we went and we bought a full testing kit from DanceSafe. So I want to add this, that like anything we've ever done, we've tested. And actually that's a lie, because the first time we tried to do MDMA, we did not test it. And even though we got it from somebody that we trusted, it ended up being God fucking knows what. I don't know if it was meth or bath salts. I have no idea. But we were fucked up. Like, it luckily neither of us had such a bad reaction, because we only did a little bit of it, and neither of us had such a bad reaction that we had to, like, get medical attention. But we felt like absolute shit the next day. And
how was the trip? Not to cut you.
I'm sorry?
How was that trip? Not to cut you off. That trip that you said you wasn't sure what it was, even though you got it from somebody that you trusted. Like, how was that trip?
It was horrible. So we thought we were getting Molly.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure after doing a decent amount of research, what we got was either SAS, which is like basically, I'm not a chemist, but my understanding is it's like a synthetic version of Molly that's like very dirty, and it's typically cut with a lot of methamphetamine. And so pretty sure that's what we got, because I just got like kind of a rush of energy, but then crashed. And my husband and I had given him more than I had taken, because he's bigger than me, and he, same thing, kind of was wired all night. I crashed. He had to basically carry me back to our tent so that I could sleep. He, on the other hand, because I'd given him more, was like wired all night long. He got horrible lockjaw, like horrible like spins, and like it was just awful. And so when I woke up the next morning, he was staring at me like a crazy person. I was like, "What's up, dude?" And he's like, "I didn't sleep all night. I watched you sleep, though, and I held your hand for a little while, but I didn't want to wake you up, so I stopped." And I was like, "Whoa, you sound like a tweaker right now. You sound absolutely insane. You're talking 100 miles an hour." And yeah, so, you know, later that day, my friend texted me, and he was like, "I'm so sorry." And I'm like, "Sorry for what?" And he's like, "I had no idea how dirty that shit was." And I was like, "Dude, you told us you got it from a friend that you trusted." And this is like a guy I worked with. And at the time, I worked for like a venture capital bank. So it wasn't like some dude I worked with at McDonald's. It was like, you know, like, I trusted him. He said he knew the person he was getting it from, but he was kind of fucked up when we met up with him. Mm-hmm. And he was like, "Oh, dude, I got some." I was like, "Cool." He met up with his friend that he trusts and he's gotten it from before. It's all good. And so when he was like, "I'm so sorry," I was like, "What do you mean?" And he was like, "I didn't know how dirty that shit was." I was like, "Oh." I had no frame of reference, right? So I was like, "Okay, like, why would your friend give us dirty Molly?" And he was like, "Oh, I didn't get it from my friend. I bought it from some dude I met at the beer garden at the festival," because this is at Coachella.
Oh, man.
I was like, "Bro, you didn't tell me that. And you put my life at risk, and you put my husband's life at risk. And that's really fucked up, because my husband doesn't even really know you. Like, I know you. And this dude and I had been really good friends. He was like one of my best friends at work. And like, it actually kind of ruined our relationship, because I was so salty about him, like putting me at risk like that. Because the thing is that, like, I knew about Dance Safe. I knew about Bunk Police. I knew that, like, at any festival you could go to, there's ways of finding testing kits and testing your shit before you do it. And stupidly, I just trusted this guy. So after that, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to buy a testing kit. They're like $60 to $120, depending on how robust of a testing kit you need and, like, how much shit you want to be able to test with them. They last for, like, 6 months to a year, depending. And, like, why would you risk your life? You know what I mean? Like, for the cost of, like, a decent amount of drugs, you can buy a testing kit. And so I bought a testing kit. And so we've always tested everything that we've done, other than, like, the plant medicine, which really, like, comes from a cactus. You know, you don't really need to test it because it's, like, it's pretty hard to adulterate a cactus. So, but yeah, so, like, anything we've ever done, like, after that, I went through a different friend that I trusted, and she got us the MDMA that we did for the first time that was real, and tested it, and it, you know, like, it came up really pure, so it was awesome. And so everything else we've ever done, we tested. So the first time we did acid, we were at another festival, and we ran into these people, like, so we had actually just done Molly, and this is the first time I was going to try to do Molly and actually stay at the festival, because almost always, like, Molly is such a sensory overload for me that I have to, like, leave, and, like, we end up, like, let's just leave the festival and go have a heart-to-heart conversation and cuddle naked. Like, that's pretty much, like my MO anytime I try to roll. So we're like, all right, well, this time we're staying at the festival. Like, we're going to try to do it and actually see music. And so I start, like, peaking, right? Like, I get this huge rush of serotonin, and I need to sit down, which is pretty typical on Molly. And so I go sit down next to this girl, and she's, like, peaking and coming up pretty hard on acid. And I was like, oh, cool. Like, we can be peaking buddies and, like, touch each other's hair, right? Rolling at this point. Like, let's be friends and, like, brush each other's hair, right? And so she's peaking on acid. And so we ended up spending, like, the whole night with these people, like, hanging out, and, like, we tried to go see, I don't know if you've ever heard of Diane Word, but they're this, like, really crazy South African, like, music group, and there's, like, this little tiny blonde chick, and then this, like, super tatted up white guy, and then their DJ is, like, the biggest black dude I've ever seen, and they make really creepy music. Like,
I'm gonna
like,
check
some of
them
the
out.
music is just, oh God, you really should. They're, like, really intense, and, like, some of their stuff is, like, electronic, and some of the stuff, like, she raps, and some of the stuff the white dude raps, and the DJ plays, like, the sickest beats, and, like, they're a really cool group, except that some of their music is really creepy. And so, oh no, I'm sorry, that was actually the next night. So we hang out with these people. We hang out with these people all day, and, like, have a great time with them. And we go back to our hotel room, and we had told them, we were like, yeah, you know, like, we've been wanting to try acid, but, like, we're really scared and and, like, really nervous. And they were like, oh, well, we have more. So, like, we've been wanting to do Molly, but it's really hard to find clean Molly where we're from. And we were like, well, how about a trade these? And, like, we have really good Molly that we've tested, and it's clean. And, like, we can test the acid and, like, tell you for sure. I mean, you're doing it, so obviously it's not going to kill us, but, you know, just to be safe. And so, like, we tested the stuff that we had in front of them, and then tested their stuff. It was pure. And so, like, we were like, hey, let's trade. We'll give you some Molly and give us some acid. So we traded. And so the next night, we do acid, and we decide to go see Diane Word. Not the best idea, because that shit's creepy as hell. And so, and acid, as much as MDMA is kind of sensory overload, it's sensory overload, but, like, the way MDMA works, right, is that it softens your amygdala, which effectively kills your fight or flight response. So it's very, like, you're not afraid of anything on MDMA, which is what makes it such a powerful drug, because, like, if you're talking about, like, in a therapeutic setting, like, it was originally used in the 80s in family therapy and, like, PTSD therapy, because if you aren't afraid of anything, you can talk openly and honestly about your feelings, and you don't feel any shame. And that's what makes it so powerful. And it's one of the things I love about MDMA, is that I've used it to have basically like at-home therapy sessions with my husband where we can talk about everything, anything that's been bothering us, anything that like we've been afraid to tell each other, anything that like, is like a horrible memory from our past that we felt shame over that we really wanted to share with each other but weren't sure how. And so we've been able to have the most insane, like, cathartic therapeutic sessions on MDMA, right? Acid, on the other hand, no effect on your amygdala, right? So, like it's just as much of a sensory overload. And the interesting thing about acid is that, like, so MDMA works by, like, stimulating the production of a lot of chemicals. So there's, like, I think it stimulates serotonin. I think it actually represses dopamine, and I think it stimulates norepinephrine. Don't quote me on that. It's been a year or two since I've read the science on it. But, like, so basically with MDMA, you can feel this chemical rush. And then 2 days later, you feel the lack of those chemicals. So, like, you have no serotonin, and you cry about everything, and you become very overly emotional. And, like, this, like, people kind of flippantly call it, like, Suicide Tuesday or Suicide Monday, right? Because, like, you do MDMA, and then, like, 2 days later, you basically want to kill yourself because you just have no serotonin left, and it takes like a week or 2 or 3, depending on how much you did, to like rebuild your stores of those chemicals. And I actually almost never do Molly anymore. So I did it like every 6 to 8 weeks for probably a hot like 6 months to a year, and then basically just stopped. Because at that point I had worked through all of my shit, I had gotten everything out that I wanted to get out, and quite frankly, the feeling 2 days later was no longer worth the fun of doing it. And I peak really hard. Like, I peak very hard on Molly, and I don't really like it. And so, like, the come down, like, so Molly is like, the first hour to 2 hours is like this crazy peak and like this, like, tsunami of chemicals, and then like there's the come down, which is like 4 to 6 to 8 hours depending on how long it lasts, and like that part feels really good. But I don't know, it's just like the other thing is that one of the best expressions I've ever heard about doing drugs is when you get the message, hang up the phone. So basically, like once you've used any drug enough to really get the benefit of it, stop doing it. Right? And like, if you can't, you probably have a problem. And so that's kind of where I got to with MDMA. So we do this acid, and it's like crazy sensory overload, but like your amygdala is still fully functioning. So it's definitely possible to get scared or nervous or like skittish on acid. And we're at Diet Word, and it's just like really creepy music. And we're like, okay, this is not a good place to be on our first acid trip. Let's go. And so we leave that, and we ended up going to try to see, like, Bass Nectar, which is this, like, super, like, deep bass music DJ. But, like, one of the things he's known for is having fans that are very, like, kind of, the term for them is wooks, which is, like a spin-off of, like, a Wookiee, like Chewbacca from Star Wars. Oh, okay. So, like, he's got all of the fans. I'm trying to put this nicely. He's got all the fans that are like the white people with dreads that smell terrible. They smell like a combination of, like, body odor and patchouli. And so one of the things that I find really interesting about acid is that the way acid works is that when you do, so, like, my first degree in college was for psychology, right? And so, like, I really get into, like, the neuroscience behind a lot of drugs because that's what's really interesting to me. Mm-hmm. And so, like, if you look at the brain scan of somebody on acid, like, you have all these different regions of your brain that are responsible for things, right? So you have, like, your language center, and you have, like, your emotion center, and your visual cortex, and, like, your amygdala, which is, like, what produces fight or flight. And then you're, like, so there's all these different things, right? Your pineal gland, which is like what people typically refer to as your third eye, and it's kind of like principally responsible for like intuition, right, and things like that. And so when you look at the brain scan of somebody on acid, all these regions of your brain that typically function independently, And in the cases of traumatic brain injury, like your brain can sometimes make these crazy like bridges over to other areas of your brain and use those for whatever function was injured in the traumatic brain injury. But for the most part, those regions of the brain don't typically talk to each other unless you're on acid. And then all of a sudden, and they're not really sure why this happens, the regions of your brain that don't typically talk to each other start talking to each other. So, like, there's all this weird stuff. And I didn't know this until I did a lot more research after I had done acid a couple times, because I was like, I feel like being on acid makes me smarter. And I feel like when I do LSD, instead of processing things, you know, in series, you know, like one thing after another, I process them in parallel. Like, it's almost like my brain can, like, execute 10 different commands at the same time. And, like, also, like, I experience music in a much more robust way. You know, like, I don't just hear it. I, like, feel it and taste it and see it. And, like, it's very hard to explain how it feels, but, like, understanding the brain science, it's like, okay, it's because for every one thing that would have been processed in one region of my brain, it's now being processed in, like, 6 regions of my brain. And so, yeah, so, like, one of the things that happens is that your senses are heightened when you're on acid. So, like, your sense of smell, your sense of taste, your sense of hearing, like, it's all, like, X10. And so standing in this crowd full of people with questionable hygiene, the smell was, like, unbearable. And so we had to leave there. And so we end up going back to our hotel room, and our friends who had done our Molly that night, because we had traded, we told them, because, like, a lot of times on Molly, like, it's like a super high, but then you're kind of wired all night and you can't sleep. But that's only on, like, some types of Molly, and it's usually on Molly that's been cut with stimulants, like, you know, methamphetamine or anything else. Ours is really pure, and we told them, we're like, hey, we've never had a problem sleeping at the end of this stuff, so, like, that's a good thing. And they were like, oh, really? We can never sleep after we roll. And I was like, yeah, well, maybe your stuff's not that clean. And so we go back to our hotel room with these people, and they straight up just pass out in our bed. Like, completely sound asleep. Yeah, in our bed in our hotel room. So we're like, oh, shit. And we're wired because we're on acid. And the thing with acid is that you don't sleep for hours and hours after you do it. And so, and it's not because you're actually not really wired. It's just your brain is very active and you feel really good. So you're like, I can't sleep. And so we couldn't sleep, so we were like, we should definitely turn the lights off for them so that they can sleep. So we were like, and like, we both were like, we want to get really comfy. And so we put on cat onesies. Like, we had these onesies that were cats. And so we both put on our, this is where shit gets weird, okay? Like, time out, full disclosure, shit starts getting weird, like, right now. And so we decided to put our cat onesies on. And so the other interesting thing about the brain scans of people that are on LSD is that they actually look more like the brain scan of a child that's between, like, 6 and 12 years old. And so, and that's in terms of, like, neuroplasticity, so, like, your brain's ability to, like, learn and process and things like that. Because you're actually a hell of a lot smarter when you're, like, under 15 than you are when you're over 25. And so it's one of the reasons that kids are much more capable of learning, and, like, you have, like, 10 times the neural pathways as a small child that you do as an adult, because basically, like, your brain starts to decide, well, hey, like, we don't use this part of our brain anymore, so if we, like, shut it off, we could devote more resources to the parts of our brain that we do use. And so what happens when you do acid is that your brain kind of starts using a lot of those areas that have been shut down, and it's actually, like, they've shown that on, like, smaller doses of acid, like, that's why the whole microdosing thing is very popular, is because, like, when you microdose and you just kind of light those areas up, it actually makes learning a lot easier. It makes systemic thinking a lot easier, which makes things like, you know, software programming, things like that easier. And so one of the things that it's always done for me is that it makes me much more playful. So I become like a big kid. And so we put our cat onesies on, and we're like, well, we should turn the lights off for them. But, like, we're cats right now, so it's cool because we can see in the dark. Right?
Sounds
so
fun.
they're like, we're totally just gonna turn the lights off because we can see in the dark because we put our cat onesies on, so we'll be fine. All right, and so like, we turn the lights off, and it is pitch black in our hotel room. And for the next probably like hour, we proceed to like pretend to be cats. And it's not like I know. It's just the thing is that people think that acid is like super disorienting, and I think if you take a ton of it, and I've never really taken like a lot. I think the most I've ever taken is like 2.5 hits, maybe 3. And that was like over the course of some time, and that was a really intense trip that I had like in bed at my house. But like, so yeah, if you take like 10 hits of acid, it's probably somewhat disorienting, and you can go like really deep into a trip. But like, when you're on like 1 or 2 hits of acid, it's not super disorienting. You just like you can pretend. Like, because I think one of the really shitty things that happens when you become an adult is you lose the ability to pretend. And it's one of the great things about having kids, but you don't really do it with your kids. You kind of like fake it. But when you do acid, like, you can get really into it, right? So we were cats. Like, that doesn't mean we actually thought we were cats. It was like, we're going to pretend to be cats, and we actually did. And so we like crawled around the room in the dark and like tried to like pounce on each other, and like it was like this whole like we took these 2 chairs that were in our hotel room and like pushed them together, and they made this like almost like bathtub size like circle because of the size these chairs were, and it was our cat boat. So then we were like cats in a boat, and like it was very fun. And then we were actually staying in the old part of Vegas, like Fremont Street. And so there's a lot of like street performers in that part of Vegas. And so when we got bored of crawling around in the dark, we were like, all right, we're giggling too much. Like, we're laughing our asses off, so we should probably just leave the hotel room because these people are sleeping and we don't want to wake them up. And so we just kind of wander out to Fremont Street in our cat onesies, and, you know, we're like out like talking to street performers, and people are looking at us like we're insane because we're dressed like cats. And and so we just spend hours like wandering around having fun, and then eventually we go back to our room and like pass out on the floor because like they're sleeping in our bed, right? So that was like, it was a really great experience. And like, I've actually never had what I think most people would call like a bad trip. You know, and I really actually don't really like that term, because there are no, depending on how you look at life, like there are no bad trips. There are difficult trips. And there are trips that, especially if you have trauma in your past and, you know, some shit to work through, there are trips that you go into where your brain and spirit may decide that you need to see some shit that you might not want to see and you might not be ready to deal with.
Headed to the top, but I lost a few homies. Some to a bullet and some to being phony. Niggas used to hate, now them same niggas Joe me. Shorty said she love me, baby girl, you don't know me. Stuck to the plan, now I'm getting bands. Band at the band at the band. Stuck to the plan, now I'm getting bands. Bands at the band at the band. Stuck to the plan, now I'm getting bands. Band at the band at the band. Stuck to the plan, now I'm getting bands. Band at the band at the band. Like my drink shaking, I stir. Had to go get it, ain't waiting my turn. When these hating boys out here gon' learn. Gotta get up off your ass, boy, go earn. Gotta go get it, ain't nobody gon' give it to you. I know life get hard, gotta live through it. Whatever you going through, you gon' get through it. Just get you a plan and you stick to it. Showed them the way, but they chose to do it different. They ain't mad at me, man, they mad how they livin'. They don't hate me, man, they hate their position. When the table turn, watch how niggas start switching. Niggas used to hate, now they Joe me. Bitches say they love me, they don't know me. Keep your pussy, bitch, just blow me. Cruise through Low and Marion, I ain't never seen Kobe. Boy, ball like I got 5 rings, I need 5 more. In 5 years, man, I wanna have 5 stores. Need me a building with like 5 floors. On a private island with like 5 whores. Headed to the top, but I lost a few homies. Some to a bullet and some to being phony. Niggas used to hate, man, I'm saying niggas Joe me. Shorty said she love me, baby girl, you don't know me. Stuck to the plan, now I'm getting bands. Band at the band at the band, stuck to the plan, now I'm getting bands. Band at the band at the band, stuck to the plan, now I'm getting bands. Band at the band at the band, stuck to the plan, now I'm getting bands. Band at the band at the bands, band at the band, 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 bag at the band, bag at the band, bag at the band, bag at the band, band at the band, band at the band, bag at the bag, bag at the bag. Lost a few homies, lost a few homies, lost a few homies. Some was being phony. Lost a few homies, lost a few homies, lost a few homies. Some was being phony.